Welcome into an emergency edition of the Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. You heard us Friday, and at the very end of that show, we said you wouldn't hear from us until Monday unless breaking news hit, and breaking news has hit. The Oregon Ducks, we've been able to confirm it, has hired Dan Lanning as its head coach. And boy, this is an interesting – not even 24 hours, because there was a report out Friday afternoon by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Chip Towers, who said Oregon had made an agreement with Dan Lanning. And then every single Oregon media outlet, myself included, reported that hire had not been made yet. A decision had not been made. And less than 24 hours later, Kirby Smart is actually on the record saying they wish Dan Lanning well and good success, and that they're excited to finish their short remaining time together at Georgia before he heads off to Oregon. The University of Oregon has not actually announced this hiring yet, but the fact that Kirby Smart is saying his goodbyes publicly to Dan Lanning, we know players have told us that Rob Mullins has confirmed to the team personally that Dan Lanning is the head coach. I think, guys, this is pretty significant. I like this hire. It's outside the box. It's the first defensive coach with head coach background since Rich Brooks, and I believe 1977. And it's also the first hire since Rich Brooks that's come from outside the program, and that person not having any head coach experience. Mark Helfrich did not have head coach experience when he was promoted. And that's the only other guy that didn't have any head coach experience with this, like Dan Lanning does not have. He's 35 years old. I think there are so many things here that are very interesting that I'm excited for. It's a risk, but it's I think a very calculated and understandably so worth taking.
He checks the boxes that we didn't feel like a Chip Kelly or a Justin Wilcox checked, right? In terms of national recruiter, elite defensive coach, young and upcoming. You're right. He's unproven. That's the only question mark, is he's never been a head coach before. You are taking a risk. He's like my age. He's like Matt. He's like our age, and he's the head football coach. He's young. Oregon traditionally has head coaches 40 and above. Mario Cristobal, obviously being much older than Dan Lanning. I agree. I think this is a huge home run swing. And I think even if you don't fully make contact, you're still going to get like a long double here, to use a baseball analogy. And Jared can explain later why that was wrong or something if it was. But my point is, I feel like this is I really love this move. I really love that they went for it and they didn't settle. They didn't go convenient. They didn't go with one of the names that were, all week being kind of linked to it. None of which would have been bad football coaches, all of which have had success at high levels as either coordinators or head coaches that were attached to it. But none of them, I don't think, have the upside that Dan Lanning does. He's the defensive coordinator of the best defense in the country. At Georgia, he has led the 3 years he's been the coordinator. 2 of them they've led the country in scoring defense. 2 of them they've led the country in rushing defense. This guy has been a fantastic coordinator. You go read stories about him. He's a worker. He's a grinder. There has been, I think, some great accounts of just how much he has put into work, I guess, to be a coach, and how hard he's worked to get here. The fact that he's risen up the ranks this quickly. I mean, this guy hasn't even been at this more than about 10 years, and now he's a head football coach at this level. He's shown he's a great coordinator. He's a great recruiter. One of the things that stands out from his resume is not only has he had immense success at Georgia this year, currently 8th in the 247 Sports recruiter rankings, he's also been a recruiting coordinator at multiple stops at Arizona State and at Memphis. Before that, I think at Sam Houston State, if memory serves, as well. He had a year at Alabama under Nick Saban. Like, if you run through everything that is with Dan Lanning, I think you feel really, really good about the upside here. Of course, this one is one where he does not have the same floor, I guess, if you will, of some of these other coaches. I said a moment ago, like, I think it's still going to be a very successful hire. He has no track record as a head coach, which of course concerns some. I understand those concerns. I'm going to trust the fact that everybody that's come around him speak so highly of him. The fact that he's 35 and has moved his way up the ladder. The fact that I trust both Rob Mullins and Phil Knight and some of the other decision makers to get a right hire in place, that they didn't rush this hire, that clearly they went through the vetting process and everything came up good for Dan Lanning. The fact that Oklahoma was supposed to be reportedly very close to landing him too. This was not a reach in terms of, oh, nobody else was looking at him. This was a guy who, whether it be in 2022 or beyond, was going to be a big-time football coach at some school, and Oregon has ensured he's theirs.
Right. Sorry, we had to unmute there. Eric and I happen to be in the same room recording this because we bailed early on the women's basketball game as the news broke. But yeah, no, this is a huge hire. This is something completely outside the box for Oregon. They do not go after defensive guys like Matt mentioned. They very rarely go after people who aren't in their own household. And this is one of those where I look at this as somebody who is rather pessimistic towards Justin Wilcox or Chip Kelly in terms of what they could provide for the program. And I see a much higher ceiling when it comes to hiring Dan Lanning. He's young, 35. If you look at his coaching career, his history, his tree, it's ridiculous. He's 35 and he's been the defensive coordinator at Georgia, one of the most storied programs in all of the country for the last 3 years. And like Eric said, they've had one of the top 5 defenses in 2 of the last 3 years. This year, their defense obviously is full of absolute studs, Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, stuff like that. But he's also had a hand in recruiting those guys to the South, to Georgia. And that's something to really look forward to at Oregon. I posted this on Twitter the other day where I took Lanning's top recruits that he's helped in either the secondary or the primary recruiting role. A lot of people kept saying oh, these guys are from the South. Of course, they're going to go to Georgia. Well, if you give Lanning the proper staff and the proper connections on the West Coast, there's no reason why he can't do this at Oregon or in California or Arizona, whatever the case may be. This guy is a recruiter. That checks that box. He's young. He checks that box. He's an elite defensive play caller, which for me checks a lot of boxes. And he's had this mentality of wanting to win. There's a story about him where he drove 11, 12 miles to go basically hours to plead for a GA job. And he ended up getting it. And that's the type of guy that you're getting in Dan Lanning. And the fact that he has had these runs at Georgia, the fact that he was a grad assistant at Alabama, the fact that he was the outside linebacker coach at Memphis for 2 or 3 years, including inside linebackers as well, and recruiting coordinator, all at the age of 30, 31. This guy is impressive. He's a smart guy. If you listen to him speak, he knows clearly what he's doing. He knows what he's saying. He knows the game of football. Like Eric said, we talked about how Oklahoma is somebody who went after him. That's a pretty darn good program. That's a pretty darn big vote of confidence into this hire as well. And I'm ecstatic for it. I really am. These are the types of hires that football programs who want to continue to move into the right direction do. It might take a year because he's young and he needs to establish these connections, and he doesn't have the best coaching circle because he's so young. He doesn't have all the options available to him. But this is someone who has only gone up at the highest of levels. And it was, like Eric said, it was only a matter of time until he was coaching a big-time program. And now is his time to coach at Oregon. And to just excite fans even more, this guy gets to go coach up Noah Sewell and Justin Flo for next year. So that's pretty fun.
And the trickle-down effect of this is already happening. Bennett Williams, Oregon star safety, he has already basically come out and said that he will not be going pro after this season and will be returning for Oregon in 2022 because he's already talked about the 2023 draft for him instead of the 2022 draft. We're seeing players hit social media and be very receptive and be very excited about this. We're seeing parents of players being very receptive and being very happy and excited about this. I think this is kind of the type of hire that you want to make internally. Who cares externally? But internally, that provides confidence in your current guys and will provide confidence in the families of those players, and most importantly, confidence for the program, and that trickle down into the recruits of this class and future classes to still be locked in on the Oregon Ducks. I'll be curious to see what happens now with some of these guys that have decommitted. We know Jalil Florence. We know Marion Winston. Those guys have decommitted. I believe Landon Hullaby. My mind is scrambled right now.
Landon Hullaby, Jaleel Tucker.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And those guys, will they stick now with their commitments? Will they wait on signing on Wednesday, or will they sign with Oregon on Wednesday? Seeing the reception of this hire, it lends me to believe that maybe some guys that were wavering might possibly, firm things up. And this is going to be an important, next 4 days for Dan Lanning. And it's, can you get through the compliance stuff so that you can start calling these guys on Sunday and kind of reaffirm and let them know where this program's heading?
It's going to be, again, we've said this every time we've recorded, it feels like the next couple of days are big. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. We've already mentioned Bennett Williams. You talked recruiting. What does DJ James decide? He's somebody from that part of the country, from Alabama. Is he familiar with Dan Lanning? Does he know? Does he? I don't know if he has a relationship, but does he know who that is? Does that excite him? Does he decide he wants to come back? That's just a thought I had. It's going to be interesting to see how he builds his staff. What's the impact of that? As Jared said a moment ago, and we should know, I think Jake Rowe of the Georgia 247 site made a note that he is a young coach. That means he doesn't necessarily have the same extensive coaching circle that like a Mario Cristobal has had. Cristobal, notably, really, really outstanding coach with terms of the hires and the ability to build the staff. Does Dan Lanning have that capability? Who does he bring in? Who are priorities? I know there's already been a lot of names tossed around that could work. Some of them were actually tossed around by his brother on a Twitter Spaces call last night, Saturday or Friday night. This whole thing has been, maybe we can, I don't know how much we want to talk about that, but the last couple of days has been so bizarre. The fact that that report comes out, it's almost immediately refuted. There's immediate pushback from the University of Oregon. That calls into question what's going on. The fact that almost exactly 24 hours later, like I think it was about 2 p.m. that AGC story came up. And it was right about 2 p.m. today. And I know that because it was about 2 minutes into the Oregon women's basketball game, which, as Jared said, we both took off from. We're still wearing our press passes here because we left the game. I've never done that any time as a sports reporter at any level. I've never left a game I'm covering to go cover something else. This is that big of a story. And it's exciting. It's exciting to have now some finality to this search. I think the hire, just gauging interest from like a Twitter Spaces, from Twitter, from duckterritory.com on the message board. People are excited. We're not the only ones that feel like this is a really good hire, that this is a good landing spot. And now what we learn is over the next couple of days, when does he meet with press for the first time? When do we get a chance to meet him? What does that look like? What kind of information can we glean from him about what he wants to build? What kind of staff he wants? Those are the type of questions we're going to be talking about. What are his recruiting ties? Obviously he's coached as an assistant coach at Memphis, as a defensive coordinator at Georgia, at Sam Houston State, as well as a position coach and I think a co-defensive coordinator. How extensive is that circle? How extensive are his ties to the West Coast? How much of a factor will that be in terms of building a staff? Will he seek to target coaches that have West Coast ties to help with the recruiting out West? How much of an inroads can he make nationally into the Southeast with his ties there over the last couple of years? These are the type of things I'll be curious to learn about over the next couple of days as we learn more about Dan Lanning. But I think just the preliminary information we have right now, this is very exciting. This is an outside the box hire. This is the kind of hire we urge them to make to avoid being convenient, to not take back your ex. I think I wrote that in a story, which was Chip Kelly. They've gone out and they thought outside the box. And in the past, when Oregon has done this, it has worked out very well. And now we see how fruitful this hire can be for Oregon. And I personally am very excited. As Jared said, think about a coach like Lanning and his history coaching the kind of athletes Oregon has on that defense next year. Think about Noah Sewell and Justin Flo and Jeffrey Bassa and Mace Funa and some of these front seven guys, this high-end talent that will be coached by somebody who across the country is so high esteemed for his ability to develop talent and to maximize that talent on the field. Oregon could become a defensive power out west, and that's not a thing that we've ever really assessed this program with. I know 19, they had a great defense. They had strong defenses early on in the 2010 decade as well under Chip Kelly, but never was the identity fully defensive minded. I think we're going to maybe see that now, and that may be a transition a bit here to Dan Lanning. I'm not trying to say the offense won't be a priority and that it'll be secondary, but when you have a defensive coach like this, the program will be operating, I think, in a little different capacity. And for me, I'm excited to see that. And I think he provides some really, really interesting and exciting traits. I'm excited personally just to get to know him a little better over the next couple of weeks, months, and years that he spends in Eugene.
Yeah, it'll be extremely interesting to see where the program overhauls and goes into. Obviously, Dan Lanning is a defensive-minded coordinator. He's proved it in the past. He's proved it in 3 years at DC, at Georgia. The offensive side of the ball is where Oregon obviously has to turn to next. They have a huge vacancy at offensive coordinator. But with the Dan Lanning signing, what you get is an up-and-coming coach who will not require the full $8.5 million that Oregon offered to Mario Cristobal. That money is now can be shelled out to his assistants. That can go and get you an offensive coordinator who is elite at whatever his play style is. You can go and start talking to other teams across the country and requesting to properly interview their offensive coordinators, which I would be excited for. Because now you have the defensive side of the ball basically locked up, which I think personally is much harder to do in college football than finding an offensive coordinator who can figure out how to run a bunch of schemes that people haven't seen yet. And the fact that you're getting Georgia's defensive coordinator is just great. You watch Georgia play every single year. They have dogs, pun intended, maybe. I don't know. They have really good players on the edges. Nolan Smith's been a beast this year. Nakobe Dean, like I've said, Jordan Davis. They are really good players, and they are really developed well, and obviously they're recruited well too. Georgia's a powerhouse, of course, in the SEC. But Oregon has pull on the West Coast, as we've seen the last few years of Mario Cristobal. Now it's going to be a recruiting war between Oregon and USC, with Lincoln Riley's arrival as a Trojan. But Dan Lanning has his own, bag of tricks. He has his own ability to be an elite recruiter as well. And if he can hire the right guys, or if he retains the right guys, whatever the case may be, Oregon can set themselves up in the future and really solidify themselves on defense first, which I think is such a big revelation in Oregon's history. You saw in 2019 with Oregon's Rose Bowl team, the defense was, I would say, way better than the offense. Their defense was a top 10 national defense. And those types of teams win. You don't have to score 38 points a game to win with those types of teams. Oregon could score 24 that season and win. They only scored 30 in the Rose Bowl. I mean, obviously they only won by 1 point, but still. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch this offensive coordinator hire search too. And despite his youth for Dan Lanning, there's probably a few options out there for him that he knows going in from his prior coaching experience, who are also youthful coordinators, who are people who might have a new style of looking at the game because they are so young, because they have their own styles, their own metrics, their own playbooks that haven't been passed down from generational coach to generational coach. So I think that's an exciting thing to watch for too. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of names where we may not know them as well as the fans may not know them, who come into this coordinator search. And that's something I'm excited to watch. I'm excited to get to know Dan and get to hear him talk and see what he has to say. It's great. And just to think about where this whole coaching search was a few days ago with, the notion that Chip Kelly was being interviewed. Kalani Sitake was interviewed. Now he has a 6-year-long extension at BYU. Justin Wilcox, another interviewee. all the plane tracking that I had about an Ole Miss plane meeting up in Phoenix area. It's been a wild 72 hours, I would say, at the least.
You brought up the offensive coordinator. Both of you guys touched on it. I think the first obvious one is that will be probably targeted by Dan Lanning is Kenny Dillingham. He's the offensive coordinator and also the quarterbacks coach at Florida State. He's been there since 2019, and he coached previously with Lanning at Memphis. He works under Mike Norvell ever since 2016, except for a one-year stint in 2019 when he went to Auburn. He coaches quarterbacks as well as helping Mike Norvell play calls. And why would he leave Mike Norvell when he's been with him basically his entire time as an assistant coach? It's because Mike Norvell is the play caller at Memphis, and this is at Florida State, and this would be Dillingham's opportunity to be the man in charge of the offense, and truly it be on him. And that's why I think this is probably Lanning's first call is the Florida State offensive coordinator. He has experience on the West Coast too. He was an offensive assistant at Arizona State in 2014 and 2015. He was a high school football coach at Chaparral High School in the Phoenix, Arizona area for multiple seasons. And this is a guy that's coached some really good quarterbacks. And so I think that's one in which you make that call. I would also expect probably some guys that are support staffers or maybe one assistant coach from Georgia could come over with Dan Lanning to Oregon. I wouldn't expect Will Muschamp or Glenn Schumann. Both those guys have already been tabbed by Kirby Smart at Georgia as co-defensive coordinators moving forward for the Ducks. And we should also note that Lanning's going to be juggling two jobs. He has confirmed, it's been confirmed by Kirby Smart at Georgia that Lanning will coach the Bulldogs in their playoff game December 31st. So that will be really good for Oregon. And the reason I say that is because now at some point in that telecast, the Oregon football program will be talked about, will be mentioned, and they will highlight Dan Lanning going to Oregon during the college football playoff. And that will be very, very good PR perspective news for the Ducks.
Dillingham is 31 years old, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think we might see a trend here. I'm not saying it's going to be exclusively coaches under 40, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a pretty young staff built around that youth. And that's a positive. You mentioned Arizona State. That's also a stop that Lanning made. Incidentally, they didn't overlap as coaches there, but that was when Lanning was there in 2013 was the same time when Dillingham was there as a student. So I think a relationship built there and then furthered, as you said, when they were at Memphis for a couple of years. So that'll be interesting. There's going to be a lot of coaches that we'll hear attached to this. I think for those listening, they might have been in that Twitter Spaces last night. I think Dan Lanning's brother,
he was
Jordan, threw out some names. He mentioned Dillingham. I think he also mentioned a couple of other names that I wish I had written them down as I was listening in, which we don't have to talk too much on the Twitter Space stuff, but it's just a game changer in terms of how cool it is that you can have the brother of a prospective head coaching candidate go and kind of drop some dirt to a bunch of Oregon fans on a Friday night. I mean, how cool was that? Oregon coaches, or I should say Oregon players were in the chat. Oregon players' parents spoke during the chat. It was pretty surreal on Friday, and I'm sure that those will continue to take place here as we progress. Parting thoughts, Matt, in terms of, I know we want to get back to covering this. We're only going to do, it's not going to be a hour plus pod like we've done recently because we have work to do. I don't know. What else is there to say? I'm kind of trying to scramble here because my brain's also thinking about all the content we're going to write. Like what else is there to say on this podcast other than I think this is a really exciting hire, and I'm just excited to kind of see how this plays out and plays together. And I just think it's really notable, the fan and the player reaction to this news, because you sometimes see hires take place and there's maybe not a lot of jubilation and enthusiasm and excitement. Oregon, the people in the bubble that matter, the players, the recruits, fans, obviously there are other people that matter, but just seeing their reception on social media and on duckterritory.com on the message board, they've already won this initial part. Now you got to see what Lanning can do as a coach and actually see what it looks like in practice. We talk about winning the press conference. You haven't even got to the press conference. I guess we'll say Oregon has won the Twitter announcement portion of the coaching search. And that's the very first step now. It used to be the press conference was the first thing. Now it's just the reception to the announcement. And I think almost universally I'm seeing positive things. Obviously, people are concerned about the lack of head coaching experience, but so many of the best coaches in the country were pretty good when they started off after not having no head coaching experience. And guess what? To become a head coach, you have to, at some point, not have had head coaching experience, just the way it works. That's just how kind of life works. So I'm not as concerned about that as maybe I'm seeing some people are. But even overall, I'm seeing pretty glowing reviews of this decision.
Yeah, I think it's risk. There is a big risk here. He's 35. He's never been a head coach before. But I think the fact that he's grown his coaching career up through working at Alabama, working and winning a championship there, and coaching at Memphis and winning a conference championship there, and then getting to Georgia and going through the rigors and going through the championship runs that they're on right now, and going through the recruiting processes at Alabama and Georgia. I think it's a risk that's worth taking, but you are right. There is still a risk, and there is still some intrigue here about what comes next. Real quick, I think another hire that he probably has to look at is internally at Oregon. I think there are two coaches that we don't know yet that of their status, and I'll say three that I think are pretty pivotal in getting and keeping. Joe Salvea at defensive line, I think that would be a really big push for his West Coast ties from a recruiting standpoint. He's a very popular coach among Oregon's program. I also think Brian McClendon, the interim head coach right now, that is one that would really stabilize the offense. And he's another one that's a culture. He's also a very good recruiter. And then also Rod Chance. I think that's another one you probably have to consider and look at and fight for and see if you can keep him. And then the recruiting support staff, there will be a decision there as well. Those guys are very important. Don Johnson in particular and his West Coast connections, considering Dan Lanning doesn't have really any out West. And so that helps. And having those guys on staff certainly helps the process here. So I think those are probably his first couple of immediate things that he needs to do, but certainly going to be fun, like you said.
Oh, yeah. Lanning has he's got some phone calls to make, and he'll surely make them. Matt, I agree. Those few names that you mentioned are like number one calls if I were him, other than calling to some recruit, because Oregon's class needs a little bit of help right now. But, yeah, I think we covered most of it. I think the only thing that I have left to say is September 3rd, 2022, Oregon, Georgia in Atlanta. Mercedes-Benz Superdome. That'll be fun.
It's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll talk to you on Monday when we have more information, more time to kind of digest this hire. But until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.